Hi, welcome to Office Hours with Amber. I'm Amber, and this is Office Hours. I'm going to make sure the audio is working, and then we're going to get ripping. We got so much to talk about. I'm so jacked to learn all about financial modeling this week. Come on, let's work. So we have so many updates. Hi, welcome to... Perfect, it's working. Okay, first and foremost, let's go back in time. I've got a lot of things to tell you about. So this month is Intro to Financial Modeling. I'm going to be using FullStackModeller to go through their Intro to Financial Modeling course because it's just simply the best. Sorry to break it to all of you other phonies. Just kidding. But I like the way that the platform breaks it into understandable modules. It is ran by my besties, Miles and Giles, and all of the FullStackModeller team. We're going to go a little back in time. So if we go back to December when I went to the ActiveCell 2024 conference, I wore these sparkly boots and our bestie Giles Mail, which you're going to learn all about him. He pointed and said, "Hey, sparkle boots, we're going to lunch." And that was enough of an invitation to the table, to the room, to the proverbial seat at the table. I was like, oh, I could make content. I should be here, which is silly that it took someone saying, "Hey, sparkle boots, come on in." But had a beautiful lunch with him and Paul Barnhurst and Excel Dictionary. And after that, I was like, what if Office Hours with Amber wasn't just a me thing? Or maybe I should get a little bit more involved. And so the funny thing is I started getting involved with, I got a FullStackModeller membership. And then I started getting involved with the rest of the community and more of the global community and all these other people that are just as really passionate about Excel and financial modeling and pulleys and levers and how math works. So I'm going to do a few things. One, we're going to go and I'm going to show you a little bit about FullStackModeller and why I love it so much. Two, I'm going to teach you a little bit about my bestie Giles, because on week 3, I want to get you so hyped because on week 3 of this month, when I do my iterative feedback with a professional, it's going to be our boy Giles, the humblest of MVPs. And you're going to see why I'm saying that here shortly. And then also, big news, I am an affiliate of the ActiveCell Conference. So if you'd like to join me in December at the Vegas conference, I think I put the link in the description of this video. But if you go to theactivecell.com/shop. Oh, Banjo's having a full moment down there. What are you doing? If you'd like to go to the ActiveCell Conference, which I fully encourage you to do, because this is where I was inspired to kind of take my hobby and push it a lot further, especially creating Office Hours with Amber. But I met some of 300 of the world's most brilliant Excel users, innovative thinkers, passionate, so excited to teach everyone what they have in their mind. Best WhatsApp group, just most fantastic people. And I know that sounds like I'm exaggerating, but when you've lived on a data island for so long and then you find your people, you lean in. So what I'm saying is if you even generally like Excel, generally solving problems, financial modeling, any of this, it's the conference for you. So without further ado, I'm going to show you a few videos of kind of just setting the scene. So the reason why I put financial modeling at this point in the year is because in November, so basically this month is financial modeling. Next month is Excel esports because I'm preparing for the World Championships. I don't think I'm going to do well, but I know I'm doing a lot better than I would have last year. October is the PowerPoint month because I have to prepare for my presentation. So the funny thing is I set my intentions for Office Hours with Amber for the full year. Come on, focus. So I set it for the full year, and I had an inkling in my soul the day, I was leaving the conference in 2024 and I was like, it'd be really interesting for me to do this weekly live stream series, this training thing, and see if I can present these findings. It would be interesting to present these findings at the 2025 conference. And boy, did I manifest the fuck out of that. So all I'm saying is if you put it into your intentions, sometimes it happens. So I put October's PowerPoint to make sure that I'm sharp for December. November, I'm going to be analyzing our KPIs and financial budgets for the 2026 year with all of the businesses that I got going on right now. And so in order to do that, I built a really, I think people would say a bad or a, it looks, okay, I built a financial model for the investors for our first round, getting into the building that we're in. So I did that, and it looks really nice, or it looks like it's like so complex. Hello. It looks so complex that you'd think that it's really good, but I think any financial modeler would look at it and be like, girl, what? Like, I think if Ian Schnorr saw it, he'd be like, girl, in what world? But whatever. That's why we learned. So this month is financial modeling, the intro to financial modeling, just to kind of, I think it's one of those things where if you know enough, it feels hard to go back to the basics, but this is the month. I'm going to go through the whole intro to financial modeling unit on FullStackModeller. So stoked. But I'm doing that so that I can prepare myself for budget season, which is coming around the corner. So if you think that budget season is not coming for you because it's in the dead of summer and you're like, oh, I'm living La Vida Loca, we're just managing the budgets we have. No, it's coming for you. So either get good now, or you're going to be so, thank you so much. You're going to be so stressed when it gets to budget season. You're like, oh, fuck, how the fuck does a balance sheet work? Sorry, I'm not an accountant, nor am I a financial modeler. But I've messed around enough to know. Not really. But that's why we're here. We're going to learn. So I'm going to do that. But that's why this is specifically important to do right now. So this month is going to be boring in terms of like, if you already know financial modeling, you're just going to be along for the ride. But I'm excited. So before we get going, I want to teach you a little bit more about our boy Giles. We're going to be interviewing him on week 3. So with my monitor. So I want to prepare you guys of how I met Giles. I had never met him before. I think I'd connected with him on LinkedIn. And then I'm at the 2024 conference and I see this video. And we are going to watch, it's like 3 minutes long, but it's so worth it because it's so fucking hilarious. And this is where I knew I'm in the right place. So without further ado, here is the humblest MVP.
Adam, my wonderful musically gifted brother-in-law. Did you get my emails about the award?
Yes, yes.
So, you've written a song for me?
Well, no, it's not.
No. Time is money. I am a superstar MVP.
I mean, I have something.
Excellent. Let's hear it.
Give me an M.
This is exactly what you think it is. And more.
Give me a V. Give me a P. He's an MVP. MVP. He's an MVP. MVP. Microsoft says that he's your guy. On Giles you can rely. He's an MVP.
Also, Peep Miles. Shout out wait, what is it?
He's an
Miles. He's the man. I'll have more words on him as the month goes on, but I met him in London. Fantastic.
MVP. MVP. He's an MVP. Yeah, MVP. Exceptional icon, community leader, and he has a massive.
Whoa, you're gonna get me cancelled, Adam.
He's an MVP. MVP. He's an MVP. MVP. From the age of just 12, he had the whole world at his feet. Would he be a surgeon or help the homeless on the street? But Giles had a vision. To others it seemed obscene. MVP status.
Let's be so clear. He hired a full-ass band and eventual dancers to be in this video.
Has always been his wet dream. He's an MVP. MVP. An MVP, yeah. MVP. Jesus turned water into wine. Giles does some things online. He's an MVP. MVP. He's an MVP. MVP. He's humble, he's dashing and courageous. In his really small field, there's no one more famous.
Hell yeah.
He's an MVP. MVP. An MVP, yeah. MVP. Hey!
This is where it gets a little crazy. So I'm going to skip to the middle of the chaos. Not that I don't love the saxophone solo. It's great. However, to put us in the middle of it.
He's an MVP. He's an MVP.
This goes on for many minutes. All I can say is that was my introduction to Giles. And so obviously when you play a video like that, people pay the fuck attention. So I did. And then he went through a, let's maybe pause it on something that's a little better. Yeah, there we go. We'll pause it there. My boy Giles. The rest of his presentation was talking about how you can do things in any which way. There's thousands of ways to do the same exact thing. And so since I went to 2023 conference, 2024, it was nice to he addressed it in 3 different ways, and I'm going to get off his face now. But he addressed the updates in Excel in 3 ways. There was, you absolutely should make that a ringtone. And also we should see if he can sell that as a ringtone, because I think he'd love to make some money off of this silly video. Okay, anyways, so he presented the idea of all of these updates to Excel in 3 ways. There's the Excel enthusiast that's so excited, so much new stuff to learn. There's the consultant who is apprehensive, and I'm paraphrasing, but like, my clients don't have the most up-to-date, latest stuff. So me being able to utilize all the newest, latest, greatest is like 50-50. And then as like a trainer, it's horrifying because you have to learn all of this stuff to be able to teach all of this stuff. And so it was nice to be like, I felt so seen in that moment. So all I'm saying is we're going to be listening to Giles' voice a lot on the FullStackModeller financial, intro to financial modeling stuff. But this guy knows what he's talking about. And also he's one of like 10, 7, 8 master financial modelers in the world. All I'm saying, guy's got fucking receipts. So we're going to listen to him. Back to the monitor. Side note. So if you want to come to this conference that I've been talking so highly about, if you go to theactivecell.com/shop, add the ticket to the cart. I do the just regular 3-day pass. I don't do the VIP. Not that it's not fantastic, but I think the most bang for your buck is going to be this $11.49 one. And when I tell you this conference, the Excel sheets alone that you receive are worth that weight in gold. That money, that hour, you are taking advantage of every single one of those people's like 10,000 hours. It's insane. So, let's say 1, then you just put in Peachy Pro, which I might have used it already. Bingo. Oh, it's already applied. But anyways, you can remove 10% by using my discount code. That's right here. So excited. Anyways, back on subject. We got things to do. Okay. Done that. There is a FullStackModeller YouTube. I know he's changing up the membership stuff, so I'm not going to go too far into that. But basically, the platform has a lot of stuff going on. Over here in the left bar, there's like the members hub where you can talk to other people. There's courses. There's the foundations and Excel mastery. I'm doing the intro to financial modeling, but they have data visualization. They have events, advanced financial modeling, and they do all sorts of events all the time. And it's like endless bang for your buck. So I digress. I'm done hooting and hollering. Let's learn about financial modeling, guys. Let's get excited. One last update. Normally this is at 7 p.m. Eastern, but I'm going to be doing it at 4 p.m. Eastern on week 3 because I don't want our poor Giles to have to stay up until midnight to talk to me. So without further ado, I'm going to start learning stuff.
Hey everybody, Giles Mail here, and welcome to an introduction to financial modeling. If you're a data analyst or an aspiring finance professional, you've come to the right place. This is a beginner-friendly, project-based course designed to help you build financial modeling literacy and begin to develop core foundational skills. We'll start with an introduction to the financial modeling landscape, including common definitions, key players, types of models, and general standards and best practices. From there, we'll explore the concept of flows and balances, and how these elements are connected to create all sorts of financial models. Last but not least, we'll dive into 3-statement modeling, which forms the foundation for more advanced financial modeling techniques. We'll introduce key accounting principles, review common examples of balance sheets, income statements, and cash flow statements, and we'll discuss how retained earnings and net cash tie these statements together. Throughout this course, you'll play the role of a financial modelling consultant for Sarah's Bakery, a small, independently owned bakery operating in London. Your role is to help Sarah build some basic models to assess the financial health and potential profitability of her business using the tools and techniques you learn throughout this course. These include a simple revenue projection, a capital expenditure forecast, and a complete 3-statement model. We've got a lot to cover, so let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Let's look firstly then at what it is we're actually going to be covering in this course. I'm going to kick off with a module called Financial Modelling 101, and this is me taking things to the highest level possible. We're going to look at the definition of financial modelling. I'm going to talk a little bit about who's building financial models typically, why they're being built, what some of the most common modelling types are, and we'll even look a little bit at the structure of those models. Then we'll move on to look at standards and best practices. There are, you will be pleased to hear, some generally accepted best practice principles that you can start applying if you have to build models straight away, and they'll make a huge difference to the quality of your
Matt,
work.
thank you so much.
Then we'll look
I
at the
agree.
first case study. You are going to get your
Sarah's
first bit
Bakery
of
is going to
practical
be
experience
sick.
as I ask you to build a simple revenue forecast in Excel. Then I'm going to introduce 2 new terms, flows and balances. And what I'll come on to tell you is that every financial model, almost without exception, is no more than a series of flows and balances with very deliberate logic connecting them. Then we'll move on to the second case study, and you will this time be building out some capital expenditure forecasts, CapEx forecasts, using those flows and balance methodologies that you've just learned about. Then we will turn our attention to 3-statement modelling, and 3-statement modelling is the fundamental building block for so many financial model types out there. So it's absolutely crucial that you understand the core concepts behind 3-statement modelling. Then you'll get stuck into your final case study where you will just put the finishing touches on an existing 3-statement model, and then we'll wrap up this course with a quick recap of the key learning points that I want you to remember, and a few suggested next steps from me if you'd like to take your financial modelling skills to the next level. So that's what
Hi, Eric. How are you? Eric, I got some words for you. We have both fallen off the wagon with our Focus Fiestas. So this week I'm back on. So I hope you also log back on because we need to body double. Giles is so smooth. I agree. That didn't mean to zoom. That felt weird. Oops. We're back.
Let's take a quick look at the course project, basically the fictional business that we've created to bring this course to life a little bit for you. So I'd like to introduce you to Sarah. Sarah has a small business called Sarah's Bakery. She has been selling her own baked goods on a high street in London for a few years now, but she's ambitious, she wants to grow, and she needs some modelling
Perfect. Thank you, Eric.
So she knows that her goods are very, very well received by those who buy them, and she's really eager to expand. She's thinking about leasing a property on the high street in London, and your role will be to provide some basic models, some basic forecasts to help her understand the potential profitability of that move. So you're going to help her initially with just a simple revenue forecast, then you're going to look at something a little bit more complex with a capital expenditure forecast, and then towards the end of the course, we're going to bring this all together, and you're going to put the finishing touches on a 3-statement forecast model for her. And here are the key objectives for you from this project and really this whole course. I want you to be able to review and understand these assumptions that are going to be provided by Sarah. And I then want you to have the confidence to create consistent and easy to follow forecast models. And you're going to be essentially putting a lot of these best practice principles into practice straight away. And I really want you to buy into them by the end of this course and understand why they add so much value. And really importantly, as you get towards the end of this course, you're going to be helping Sarah pick out those key insights from those forecast models. At the end of the day, building the model is only half the job. You have to then create some valuable insights for whoever your stakeholders are. So it's a really, really important final step that we'll be going through. So you now know a little bit about Sarah and Sarah's Bakery, and after a fair amount of theory that we're going to go through up front, this is the company we're going to turn to time after time to provide some practical modelling support.
Blessed. Okay, I think I'm pronouncing this right, but Kishav. So essentially, Office Hours Lamber is just a way for me to up-level my skills kind of with all the modern Excel updates. I feel like I was falling extremely behind. So in previous months, I've done dynamic arrays, Lambda, Power Query, diving into these things to make sure that I am sharpening the product, which is my service of peachy profitability, fractional industrial engineering, but being able to make sure that my primary method of communication, Excel, is up to snuff with all of these new things that are coming out. So what I recognized in 2023, I was dazzled. I thought, by 2024, I'll know all of this stuff. I went to the 2024 conference and I realized I hadn't absorbed nothing. So I am making an active pursuit to learn more things about Excel this year. So I'm in month 8. And so this month is more of using all of the tools and the skills that I've met in the last 6 months, 7 months, and then being able to apply that into financial modeling as well. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing here. We talk a little shop, we talk a little business, and we talk a little data. So mostly the first week of the month is where I will Google, YouTube, ChatGPT, whatever concept I'm working on. This week, I just have a boatload of resources with FullStackModeller. So thank you for being here. And if I could ask, how did you find out about Officers Lambert? And yeah, I'm just nosy now. Thanks for being here. Okay, back on subject.
Before we start looking at any financial models or talking about financial modeling in any detail, I really want to set expectations with you for this course. This is so important to me before you invest hours of your time, because I want you to know the level of complexity that I'm going to be going into. This course is designed for financial modeling beginners. So if you're looking for any sort of advanced techniques, any sort of industry-specific modeling training, you're probably not going to find it here. So I will certainly be introducing some of the most common model types, and we'll be looking at those best practices, but I'll be doing all of that very much at an introductory level. My goal is to introduce you to the fundamental principles of good financial modeling. I want to build your confidence, and I want to leave you with a sense of being financial modeling literate. This distinction between literacy and expertise, I think, is really important. And you can think of it a little bit like as if you were trying to learn a new language and go to a country where that language is spoken. You're not going to become an expert from this course, but I want to leave you with enough of an understanding so that you can just get by, as I would hope you would like to do if you just started learning a new language and you traveled to a country where that language is spoken. We will cover a mixture of theory and practical skills. So I'm going to ask you to do some modeling on a few occasions throughout this course. You don't have to do that. If you're not comfortable, you're very welcome to just follow what I'm doing on screen and try and take it in that way. But the opportunity is there. When we do get practical, it will just be certain elements of what would be considered part of a bigger financial model, not necessarily building an entire model from scratch. When you see me in Excel on screen, you will see that I'm using an Office 365 license, and I'll be recording everything from my PC for those assignments and those walkthroughs. So if you're using anything different, if you're on a Mac, for example, or if you're using an older version of Excel, you may see something slightly different to what I'm showing you on screen. The eagle-eyed amongst you may have already noticed that modeling can and is spelt in certain parts of the world with one L and in other parts of the world with two L's. So just a heads up that I'm going to be spelling it with two L's from now on because I'm sat here recording this in England. It means exactly the same thing, so please don't worry. So keep all of this in mind as we start going through these modules. It's really important to me that you just had an understanding of what I'm aiming.
Oops. I want this to be full screen, but I unfortunately don't know how to do that. Also, I was wondering what the... Let's just put that on my desktop. Cool. Okay, we're gonna come back to that later. Yeah, I'm just gonna watch a bunch of videos and then do stuff. I think I got a lot of benefit out of the Excel mastery, the foundations in Excel mastery in the FullStackModeller. I did this a few months ago. So if you go back to February, I did a lot of FullStackModeller back then. And actually doing the examples. Now this seems silly, but you know when you like someone suggests you a book and then you read it, or you don't read it, you just like Google like the top Spark Notes of it. Like there's one book that's like the 12 principles of life. And then it's like, I just Googled the 12 principles instead of actually reading the book. But you get so much more value when you really read the book. Same thing with this is I actually will get real value when I do the examples. I'm real bad about cutting some corners. So we're going to take this nice and slow and it's going to be great. God, I keep doing that.
So here are some of the topics we're going to cover. I'm going to introduce financial modeling as a concept and then look at some definitions with you. We're going to look at some of the key players in the industry and we'll kind of align that as best we can to a typical business life cycle. We'll talk a bit about some common model types and then we'll wrap it all up at the end with some key takeaways from this section. And then being a little bit more specific, here are some key learning objectives that I have for you from this section. I'm going to be explaining why I think financial modeling is so worth your time and effort, and I want you to really buy into those reasons with me. I'm also going to introduce 4 key questions, or question words really, that if you can remember and have in your back pocket, you can use anytime you're involved on a project that involves a financial model. I'll also be looking at some common definitions of financial modeling. There are multiple definitions, and I just want you to come away with a broad understanding of the scope of this definition. I mentioned key players, so we will be looking at some of the most prominent players, these organization types that typically build some of the most common model types across different industries. And then we'll actually look at some of those common modeling types as well. So we're not going to create an exhaustive list, but we'll pick a few of the most common types, and then we'll actually look at some of the similarities and differences those models have from a technical perspective. So there's the scope of this first module, this first section, and let's just get started straight away.
Side note is I used to be a beverage demand forecaster at Anheuser-Busch. And so I am very familiar with forecasting and like building a logical plan based on like logical things. It's like an anecdotal multiple regression where it's like finding your canaries in the coal mine that are going to, sway certain pulleys and levers. So the nice thing is I'm coming into financial modeling with like a very deep understanding of how this lever makes this thing move financially and business wise. And like, that's not as much. Thankfully, I don't have a huge learning curve in that way. Really, this is going to be really good for like the mechanical and definition and like a lot of like the standards that I am missing because I worked in beverages, not in dollars. But like sales forecasting relates to dollars, but it doesn't always work that way. But I'm talking too much.
So I'm going to start off with what I believe is the most important message to remember from this course. And it's this. It's that financial models come in all shapes and sizes. Now, that will in part be down to the different requirements, the different projects and the scope of those projects that you work on. But actually, it also comes down to the many different ways that modelers of all levels of experience approach their modeling work. So I believe that if you put 10 professional modelers in the same room and you gave them the same question, you would probably end up with 10 very different looking models. But actually, there's more to it than this. Good models will not always look the same, and bad models could actually be quite hard to identify as bad models. There are very, very experienced modelers out there in terms of time spent modeling who still produce very, very bad technical models. Those of you that are familiar with Excel will know that there are lots of different ways you can approach a problem. And that's the same in financial modeling. There is no single right way to build a model, but there are some generally accepted best practices and principles that you can apply that will make your modeling much, much better overnight. And finally, I'd like you to remember this pretty well-known quote from the broader modeling industry. All models are wrong. Some are useful. Now, all predictive models are wrong because it's pretty much impossible to get a prediction of an uncertain future 100% right. Some are useful, but you can increase their usefulness by making sure that you're building them to rigorous best practice standards. And that's what we'll come on to look at.
Some models are wrong. All models are wrong. Some are useful is literally the most iconic quote of all time. And I've been using that ever since I heard it at the first conference. Blessed. Same thing with like when I used to work and like deal more with ETAs, when someone's like, can you promise that this truck will show up on time? And I'm like, well, let's break down this acronym together. ETA means estimated time of arrival. So I can't make promises. I can promise that the ETA currently is this number, but that's about it. We don't use the P word and the G word. Promises and guarantees do not live in my world. So I felt very validated when they were like, all models are wrong, some are useful. Because it's so true.
So here are a few reasons why I think learning the fundamentals of financial modeling is so worth your time and effort. I'm also hoping you don't need that much convincing because you're watching this video and you've started this course, but I'll go through it anyway.
No convincing.
So firstly, having this basic understanding of financial modeling and the fundamental principles behind it gives you this incredibly unique perspective into a business's performance, whether that's the actual performance in the past or its potential performance in the future. And that could be linked to specific outputs like a valuation or looking at a forecast of cash flows, revenues, profits, and so much more. And even with a basic understanding of financial modeling, this basic literacy that I've talked about already, and a basic understanding of the accounting principles that sit behind most financial models, you can be the one to discover these incredible stories and to share these hidden insights behind the data. And having this ability means that you will be very valuable. Having these modeling skills makes you so versatile. And if you think of any business operating really, the finances are so crucial. It doesn't matter how good your product or service is. If the finances don't work out, if you're not making profit and cash at the end of the day, then the business just will not survive. So these skills that you're going to learn here will add value, I would say, to virtually any team and any organization that exists.
Bless up. Let's go.
Now, we're still in the phase of this module where I'm really just sowing some seeds, leaving these key messages that I want you to take away before we get stuck into anything. We haven't even talked about the definition of financial modeling. I promise you we will get there. But I want to introduce you to these 4 key questions, or really 4 key question words with some sub-questions that I'll go through. And the idea here is that if you remember these 4 key question words, you can pretty quickly assess either where you yourself are in terms of your project, your modeling project, or you can very quickly assess and sort of test out where other people are if they're working on this modeling project. So these 4 key question words are who, why, what, and how. And we're going to talk through each of these in turn now. So depending on the project you're on, the who might relate to other external organizations, but it also might just relate to internal teams and individuals. And most importantly for me, the who relates to the project sponsor. Who is the person that is asking for this model to be built? Who is the person that's signing off on the scope or the spec of the model so that you know exactly what questions your model is going to be answering, and actually almost as importantly, what questions the model is not going to be answering. What is going to be agreed to be out of scope up front? This also relates to who is going to be developing the model and maintaining the model. That could just be in terms of the one-off development project, but actually if the model is an operating model, if it's going to be used time after time in the future, who's going to be responsible for those development updates? And actually, who are the end users?
That's actually such a good point. Just to lean in on the who is I built a financial model before, but I did not build it to be like it was supposed to be like a display rather than a utility. And that's important because if you build something to be able to, it's like doing napkin math to prove a point. And like, if someone's like asking you, if I go from here to here and if you're like trying to map out your cross-country road trip and you only need to do that one time. It's not like you're doing that every week. But if you need something to be built for utility is like, how do we, I'm not using great analogies here, but like building something to be a tool versus building something for a presentation or to get to an answer, completely different things. Brother and you started a B2B business years back. It's going smoothly. I'm not part of it anymore, but it takes great effort. Love the studio setup. It's great for staying. Thanks. Absolutely. Come on in. The water's warm. I try to make it a little cozy, but this is just my living room. So I just be working here. But back on subject.
Are they different?
What kind of business was it? Side note. Kashav. Kashav. Let me know the phonetics.
People or teams from the developers. Users tend to be less technical and they tend to need less technical skills. You are setting them up with specific areas of the model that they have to interact with. And then some of the underlying logic and coding, they don't have to worry about. But it's really important to identify these people and identify whether they're different to the developers up front. The why comes next. Essentially, why is the model needed? What is the purpose of this model to the business? And really, again, this comes down to what questions is it going to answer and really getting a firm grasp and signed agreement for the scope of that model. And the best way to look at this really is to just list out those specific questions. And a nice way to do this in a scoping phase is to list out the questions that will be answered and also very specifically to list out the questions that will not be answered at this point in time. Those questions that are not answered now might be
So of my industrial engineering background, there's these things called is not diagram, and it's crazy because it's just a list of what is and is not included. So like he was saying with the who and the what and like what will be answered and what won't, it's actually quite helpful to have like a full scope and list out things like this will be you. And it seems silly to do, but this keeps everyone in line of like what is in scope and what is not actually going to be accomplished. Because especially when you get into financial models really are, in my world, used for every single aspect of the business, because you've got every department has X amount of dollars that they're going to have to spend to achieve Y amount of profit and et cetera. And so if you need a whole team to be in there versus if I just have a like production project model, that's different than a business model versus assessing the profitability of just like my department. And so creating tools with the mindset of like who's going to be using them and what they're actually going to be using it for is, for instance, like having your demand planner doing sales planning in their own model that feeds into the greater business P&L to be able to say, for the, C-suite or, the owner to be able to say, we can reinvest X amount of dollars to create Y amount of opportunities because they have that autonomy in their model versus doing every single model and every single pocket of the business is one tool. It is nice if it's small, but when you have hundreds of employees or if you're getting, huge, that doesn't really work anymore. And similarly, your demand planner does not need to know the full financial profitability, the salaries of all the employees, et cetera. And so there's some things that are like financially sensitive in some parts of models. And so the nuance of making all the models work together and all follow the same technical rules is actually quite difficult. So I'm excited. I don't need to keep giving you guys context. I like to chat with you.
be factored into a future update of the model
Ooh,
in a separate
trading
project.
herbs and
It's
herbal
really
products.
important to get
That's
this clarity up
fun.
front. What is the next question word? So, what type of model are we actually going to be building? What's most appropriate for the challenges at hand? Specifically, what outputs, what KPIs is the model going to produce? Is it going to be a 3-statement model with some scenario functionality? Or are we going to be looking at enterprise and equity values from a valuations perspective? Is it going to be a discounted cash flow? Are we more interested in profit and EBITDA? We'll come on to all of this, but knowing the specific outputs that we're going to produce is crucial before we start tapping away at Excel. And it's also important to understand the data, the parameters, the assumptions that we're going to need to plug into this model and essentially run them through the calculation engine to produce the financial outputs, those financial forecasts that we need. And then finally, the how. And this really is the detail of the technical model build. How is it going to be built? What standard are we going to follow? What rules, what principles, what structure are we going to build in terms of the worksheets, the components within our worksheets? And then actually, how is the model going to be used once it's been built? How are we going to share it? Who are we going to be sharing it with? How are we going to think about things like layers of security and privacy and so on and so forth? Now, the first 3 questions, the who, the why, and the what, I think if you think back to that idea of putting 10 modelers in a room, you should get pretty similar answers from the 10 modelers. There shouldn't be that much difference in terms of answering the who, the why, the what for any modeling project. The how is where things get interesting. And this is where you've just got different camps of modelers who approach things in different ways when you get into the real weeds of the logic in Excel. And we'll come on to all of that later on in the course.
Beautiful. I'm excited. I think Python I wasn't excited for, Lambda I wasn't excited for, but this feels like a real attainable, achievable goal. Now, usually, namaste from India. Thanks for joining. Normally these are only 1 hour long, and so there's probably a few hours of content that I need to watch through. So I will, between this week and next week, probably zip through a bunch of it by myself just to make sure I keep pace so I have something to talk about with Giles, because I don't want to waste his time and be like, hi, here's my dumb model that makes no sense. So all I'm saying is get excited. I'm so excited. Let's do it.
What I'd like to do next with you is talk definitions. What is a financial model? If you were to go and Google that question, or to Google what is financial modeling, you would find quite a wide variety of answers coming back to you. They will be quite similar in certain ways, but also potentially confusingly different. Here are the sorts of things I think you will find. A financial model is a forecast of a company's earnings and expenses.
Thank you for coming.
And that's not too bad, but where...
Okay, I need to ask you guys. India. First of all, how cool. I'm from Michigan. Not much going on here. How'd you find out? What are you in the Discord group? If so, did you just compete in the last Microsoft, like the MEWC competition? If so, how did it go? Back on subject.
It's saying earnings and expenses.
Thanks for being
that's
here.
Very income statement focused, which we'll come on to talk about later. For me, that's a little bit too narrow. You might see something like this, an abstract representation of a real world financial situation. I like parts of this, but that may not be instantly clear what it's actually talking about overall. We might see something like this, a tool for determining likely financial outcomes based on a company's historical performance and assumptions about future variables. Okay, a longer sentence. This is focusing in on a company, which I don't think is always correct. I like the fact that this definition does mention, at the very least, historical performance, and perhaps then using assumptions, inputs of some sort to drive future forecasts. Here's my attempt at a single sentence definition, and I've tried to pick each word very, very carefully. And if you'll just indulge me for a couple of minutes, I'm going to talk through each of those words individually. A time-based representation of an entity or project's uncertain future financial performance. So let's take each of the key words in there one by one. Firstly, time-based. I believe almost every financial model, no matter what industry, no matter what challenge you're facing, will be based on periods. You will see some sort of time-based logic within your model, whether that's a breakdown by month, by quarter, by year, or something else. Representation. Okay, this is, as one of the earlier definitions mentioned, an abstract representation of something that we expect to happen in the real world. That's really important. An entity or project.
Scrolling
so for
YouTube.
me, when you see
How
definitions
cool.
that focus on a
Well,
company,
thanks for being here.
I think that's a bit too narrow. You will see financial models that are forecasting the performance of something to do with an individual's personal finance, but equally, you might see something that's just looking at a project. And you would see that so commonly at a company at departmental level. You might see that if you're working on a bid team where you're trying to win new project work. So I think you have to cover both, an entity or a project. Uncertain. Well, hopefully this is quite obvious, but where we're dealing with potential future performance, we are dealing with an uncertain future. And if we just think back to that quote that I mentioned a few lessons ago, all models are wrong, some are useful. And really the challenge for us is trying to get our assumptions and our logic as well refined as possible so that our prediction of that uncertain future is in the right ballpark. Future is a really interesting one. So I think traditionalists would definitely always think of a financial model as a forecast of the future. And that's why I've just put this word in here. But I do acknowledge that actually you could argue a financial model either just looks at the past, and that can be a very time-based model of what's happened in the past. But typically, I think we do think about future performance. It's also the case that a lot of financial models will just lean on past performance to drive some of the assumptions that create that future prediction. And then financial performance, I think, is the most obvious part. It's called a financial model. It's safe to assume that we will be dealing with financial information. Okay, regardless of the exact definition, financial models will help stakeholders make informed data-driven business decisions. This is the key purpose. Whether you're using Excel or another tool, it is just that. It is a tool, and really the value comes from the insights that you take from whatever it is that you pull together in terms of analytics and forecasts. A financial model should always be serving a clear purpose. We talked before, and I'll keep repeating this, that models must be built to answer specific questions or sets of questions, and you have to have complete clarity on what those questions are and what the answers you're trying to reach are before you start building your model. And to look at this from another way, let's just talk about some of the most common elements you would expect to see in a financial model. You will see inputs, calculations, and outputs in almost every situation. Inputs are those drivers. They're the things that you have to manage and update potentially. The calculation, that's the calculation engine of your model. And all of that is used and managed to create the outputs that will provide those insights for you. You should also see, but you don't always see, controls. And these are these additional worksheets, the additional setups that you put into a model to just help manage the integrity of your model. That can be things like tables of contents, an internal audit and testing sheet, some sort of a user guide, and quite often quite a lot more. Timelines. When we get into some of the modeling examples on screen in this course, you'll see that I tend to use a separate time worksheet where I hold all of my time-based logic. And that time-based logic really then sets up most of the structure for the rest of the model. So it's very, very common to see time and period.
I'll be interested to see how he handles, or how the standards in the community handle short, medium, long-term timelines, because sometimes, and what I've recognized from my old forecasting experiences, sometimes you only need to forecast on the monthly basis, but that month is comprised of 4 to 5 weeks, 28 to 31 days. And sometimes to be able to make an informed decision about the month, you need to understand the days and the weeks better. And there's some things that are impacted by days and weeks, and there's some things that aren't. So for instance, if you sell it, like let's say, for instance, you're Sarah's Bakery and you're selling at the beginning of the month versus the end, if you have to prep all of your bagels for the month's volume of bagels is 100 bagels, and you don't know what day of the month it's actually going to land on, then you actually don't order enough materials to supply until the end of the month. And it's like, well, maybe people don't want to buy at the end of the month. Maybe they all want to buy in the second week of the month. Who knows? But that's where I have had a lot of trouble in previous financial and sales models where unless there's an over complication of it by going to the day level, because day level is almost never useful. Like, unless you are staffing day to day, or like something that needs like really meticulous effort, like doing it down to the day never usually makes sense. Week to week, I've seen a lot of benefit from. Month to month, absolutely. And if you're forecasting in years and you don't work in some sort of energy or environmental something, what are you fucking doing? But I digress. I'm sure there's other reasons for it, but month, it's going to be the battle of month versus week, but we'll see how they handle it. I'm sure it's going to be months, maybe quarters. Who could be sure?
It's being the sort of fundamental building block of a lot of the structure across the rest of your worksheets. Flows and balances. So we have a whole module on this. You will see these calculation blocks of logic, and that tends to be broken down into flows and then balances, which will form the core sort of building blocks again of everything we do when we look at our financial forecasts across our income statement, otherwise known as the profit and loss statement, our balance sheet, and our cash flow statement. Now, not every model does include the creation of a 3-statement forecast, but typically, and again, if you think of traditionalists in the modeling space, you would see 3-statement modeling as a real fundamental building block of most model types. All right, so there's a quick rundown of what a financial model is to me and some of the key elements you'd expect to see in a model. What we'll come on to talk about next is some of the most prominent players in the modeling industry. Let's look at who's actually typically building these financial models.
Depends on what your model is. If it's health services, COVID is a great thing for every second week. That's true. That's true. And I'm sure like for are we loading? For like HR departments, like being able to find like forecast like pay periods, like by pay period, I could see that being a thing too. I haven't seen it as much because I think they would end up just doing weekly, and then I wonder how they do that.
So who's actually building these elusive financial models? Well, quite a lot of different people and quite a lot of different people in various organizations. So the list that I'm going to show you now is not an exhaustive list, and there were other categories I could have very justifiably added here, but I just want to give you a flavor of what's happening. So I think for most people that aren't close to the industry or close to the financial modeling community, if you were to think about who's building these models, you might think of these sorts of organizations: venture capital firms, private equity houses, and investment banks. And the similarity here really for me is that these sorts of organizations are looking at this corporate finance lens. They're looking at potential values of businesses or potential returns to groups like shareholders of a business. And I think we should just expand our mind a little bit and consider the other key players in this community. And they would include people working on project finance deals, okay? These enormous transactions that involve the financing of huge sums of money, where the models can be incredibly complex and play an enormously important part in the actual commercial deal that's agreed. Accounting firms, both from your local small accountant through to the big four accounting firms, doing various sort of support activity for businesses. And then, most interestingly for me, internal finance teams at a company that could be in any industry really across the world. For me, this is actually where the bulk of financial modeling takes place in terms of overall volume. It may not be as complex as some of the modeling that's happening in a project finance deal or within the work that takes place at a private equity firm, but in terms of sheer volume, this is where most of the activity, I think, takes place, and predominantly still in Excel. What we'll do next is just try and plot some of these key players across a very typical business lifecycle.
Let's do it.
So let's have a look.
Hedge fund analysts also do a lot of modeling, I imagine. I feel like any business that even touches money, talks about money, has the word fund, have to be just up in Excel, financial modeling their little ass off all day long. Like, I can only imagine. Thankfully for me, so I technically did work on a PPM, planning and performance team at AB for like the shortest stint. Was I horrible at it? Yes, I was, because there was just so many meticulous details about like lawn care, and I couldn't make any decisions in this role, but I did learn a lot about how FP&A works with like all of the different teams and how it all reports up and rolls up, which was pretty cool. Thankfully, so that's where I learned about month end and like all the nuts and bolts that have to happen in order to like actually see a clear picture of what's going on in your business. But so that's the exciting thing about this, is that I got a little teaser of that. I'm going to do this course, and then I'm excited to improve my month end performance, or like my month end calculator and month end review cycle with Good Trade Depot, and be able to make that very fast. Because right now, because I'm so unsure about what I'm doing, it's taking me a long time to do. So it's like the middle of the month and I'm like, here's month end. And it's like, who cares at this point? It's already almost the next month end. So this also will help very tangibly in my day-to-day. So
key players in relation to a business's typical life cycle. And the key point here really is that these key players will start to take an interest in companies, or to actually start getting involved with companies at different stages of the life cycle. And that ranges from startup through to growth to maturity, and then eventually, depending on your outlook on life, perhaps unavoidably into a decline phase. Now, this is quite textbook. There are certainly ways that you can change this typical life cycle, but we're just going to keep it nice and simple for now. So I'm going to plot each of those key players that I mentioned in the last lesson along this typical life cycle. I'm actually going to start with one that I didn't mention, but it's only because it's very similar to another, and that's angel investors. So these are sort of the earliest type of potential investors that would often look at companies that haven't even got off the ground yet. They haven't started operating. They are just an idea in an entrepreneur or a set of entrepreneurs' heads. Then a little further down the life cycle stage, you'd expect to see VCs taking an interest. Both of these are looking at the same sort of outputs from their modeling. They're looking at the same sort of insights. And broadly, that is, how much do we think we can get as a return on any investment we make in this company now? Then as you see the business grow further and perhaps even go into maturity and decline phases, you would start to see investment banks and or private equity firms take an interest or get involved. Now, investment banks have many different arms to the work they do, but some of the most common activities you'll see investment banks getting involved in would be things like supporting M&A activity, mergers and acquisitions, or supporting companies if they're actually looking to go public through an IPO. And private equity firms would typically be looking at large-scale investments, often where they would acquire the entire business, and then they'd make quite significant changes through the operations or the structure of the business that they've taken over. And typically with private equity, this can involve a lot of debt funding through what's known as a leverage buyout. Then if you look at the internal finance teams and any supporting accounting firms or teams externally, they could be involved at any stage of the business's life cycle, really, through from the very, very first stages of startup all the way through to a company's decline. And I've plotted project finance on here. It doesn't fit exactly because the whole structure, the whole commercial setup with project finance is slightly different and it involves something called a special purpose vehicle, SPV. But in principle, a lot of the modeling that happens in project finance is at that stage before anything is built. There's no actuals to look back on. You're just looking at an enormous potential infrastructure project, and you've got to model the potential future cash flows that will be generated from whatever the assets are that you're creating, and you need to figure out how much money is needed to finance the construction of those assets in the short term. What we're going to look at next is just another variation of this, but I'm going to focus just on internal finance teams, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the most common stages you would see an internal finance team or function go through and the modeling you might see alongside those different stages.
That's actually kind of funny. I guess I would have been a project finance, I would have made a project finance financial model first, technically. How
So
fun.
let's take that business life cycle and let's just focus our attention on the internal modeling that happens within the company by individuals or teams at different stages. And the key point here is that the models, the intentions of those models, the outputs can really vary depending on the company, but actually, even more importantly, the life cycle stage that you're at. And that will be done by different teams and individuals. So here we are back with our graph, this time with a little bit more. So we just plotted a rough idea of revenue over time, cash and profit. And the first stage I'm going to highlight is here, really early on, pre-operations perhaps. And this is where probably a founder is just putting together some rough numbers as part of an initial business plan. They're probably going to be very optimistic numbers because this business owner is trying to get other people on board, trying to gather some funds potentially to start this business. And this could be really high level assumption modeling at this point. What do we think the total addressable market is? And what sort of proportion of that market do I think I can get? And quite often you will be looking at short-term cash flows, but still with a slightly longer term view as to when we can start to see the business breaking even and starting to generate positive cash flows. The next phase we'll look at is one where the business is operational. So it has paying customers. The concept to a certain extent has been proven. And now we would see perhaps a dedicated finance person or a few people who would be doing a number of regular activities. So probably quite regular budgeting and forecasting. And also if investors have been brought on board, then there would be some modeling to support the management and the expectations of those investors. And the last stage that I'll highlight is a company that reaches maturity. And by this point, a company would typically have a dedicated finance function. So the modeling will be much, much larger in volume and very varied. You will have FP&A teams in here, management accounting teams, corporate finance teams, head office finance teams, and probably much, much more. And depending on what the modeling is, it may be used in support of some very important strategic decisions. And that can be things like those activities we mentioned earlier, an IPO, a merger, an acquisition, or the bringing on of additional debt. I'll leave you with a bit of a visual comparison that I hope sticks with you. And that's just to take the two extremes here. Think firstly of the individual business owner, the individual.
I would say we are currently in this, if we zoom in, I am at number 2 on the climb. And that is why I'm so excited to do this month right now, because now I'm setting myself up to get from here to there, because I've seen what a 3 looks like, which is cool because I know what the future needs to look like. And now I'm building infrastructure from the very beginning on where it should go. And I'm so blessed to be surrounded by people like the FullStackModeller, all the Excel folks, to be able to climb from 2 to 3 with the least amount of friction because I've got so many fucking brilliant people around me. So
Entrepreneur with an idea in his or her head, tapping away at a spreadsheet, trying to figure out whether the business could be viable, whether there's money to be made from this idea. Contrast that with the modeling done at a really large, mature company where you have potentially hundreds of people in a finance function, not only doing modeling to support strategic decision making, but also doing a lot of modeling just to manage the business, just to maintain the operations, to understand what's happened, and to understand what the likely outcomes in the near future are for the company. As I said earlier on, financial models really do vary. They vary in terms of the scope, the questions you're trying to answer, the outputs you're producing, the people involved, the companies involved, and so many more factors that I haven't mentioned. But what we're going to come on to look at very soon are some best practice ways of working. So the idea is that no matter what project you're on, no matter what team you're involved with, no matter what the challenges that you're trying to solve with a financial model, there are some ways that you can approach your modeling work to ensure that it's as good as it can possibly be.
Blessed. How's everyone doing? Thanks for hanging out.
What we're going to do now is actually look some of the most common modeling types out there. Now, this is not going to be an exhaustive list. Essentially, I've picked a handful of the most common model types that I've seen. And what I'm going to do in each case is just talk through some of the key features of those models. And then I'll turn to Excel and I'll actually show you, for most of them, at least one example of what these models might look like. Now, this comes with a real health warning straight away. And that is that the models that I'm going to show you, I'm not going to share because I don't want you to get distracted at this stage, downloading models and trying to unpick sometimes quite complex logic that you may not have seen before. So I'm going to show you what some of these look like on screen. I'm going to highlight some.
I didn't even bring up. There's the MEWC, Microsoft Excel World Championships. There's also the FMWC, which is the Financial Modeling World Cup. And I'm so stoked that I hope after this is over, I want to probably start playing around with getting looking into the CFM and more into the FMI, like the Financial Modeling Institute. I kind of want to do a little side quest and maybe get certified, which would be cool. Maybe. I think it'd be important for me as peachy profitability. Profitability is in my business name. I think financial modeling needs to be something I'm pretty good at. So I think this is the beginning of a pretty large side quest. It's like, yes, I am fractional industrial engineering and I have an understanding of profitability, but it'd be pretty cool to cook up that way. So separate thing from that is I'm excited. I hope that I start competing the Financial Modeling World Cup as well, just to see, because I've learned so much from the MEWC that I think it'd be important. Okay, we're gonna watch one more video and then we're gonna say a good night to everyone, or a good morning to my India folks. Thank you for being here.
Of the key similarities and differences, many of these models that I'm going to show you are either from elements of our FullStackModeller training program, or they're just models that I've picked up or seen or built myself over my own time working in financial modeling. I've not even gone to the extent of trying to standardize the formatting or the structure. I actually want you to see that models, even of the same type, can be built very, very differently to get to the same answers. The first model type we're going to look at is the valuation model, which is typically built to estimate the enterprise or the equity value. The enterprise value is really the value of the entire company ignoring its capital structure, and the equity value is the value that you would attribute to shareholders of the business. Quite often with valuations models, we're actually looking at recent past financial performance, and then we're using those numbers and applying some growth assumptions to get to the forecast of the numbers in our income statement, on our cash flow, and on our balance sheet. And what we're trying to get to, if we're doing an intrinsic valuation of a company, is what's called a discounted cash flow, a DCF. And this is where we essentially forecast all of the future cash flows we think the company will generate, and then we discount the values of those cash flows to today. It's this concept behind DCF that we have to remember, that $100 in our pocket today is worth more than $100 received in the future. We do this with a core timeline that's typically between 5 to 8 years, and something called a terminal value, which captures all of the potential cash flows that the company will make beyond that core timeline. So if we think about the structure of a typical valuations model, we might see something like this. We would have a core timeline, perhaps monthly, perhaps annual, of something like 5 years. And then beyond that, we have to capture the potential cash flows that this business will generate beyond that core timeline. We don't really want to have to model specifically every single period to the end of time. So we have to find a different way of doing this. So what does this mean for the actual structure of our model? Well, we're going to have this core timeline. We're going to have the model actually generating the specific cash flows in this core timeline period. But then we've got all of the other cash flows, and we have to find a way to capture the value of all of those. Now, because they're so far in the future, the individual cash flow values will be much, much less than those in the core modeling timeline period. The value of all of those cash flows is covered by this terminal value. And then what we do is we take all of our expected cash flows from the core model timeline, we take that terminal value, we wrap it up, we discount them all into today's value, and that single number becomes the value of our business, our enterprise value. What we'll do next is we'll just have a look at a couple of examples of what a valuations model might look like. All right, so here's a version of what a valuations model might look like. And quite a lot of this model actually aligns quite closely to the way I model myself. There are some subtle differences, which we might come on to later. But if you look at the structure of the worksheets, we've got our inputs held in one worksheet, formatted in a certain way. We'll come on to that in more detail when we look at best practice. We've got some timing logic for the underlying structure of the model held nicely in another worksheet. We've got a bunch of calculations going on to drive those forecast financial performance figures. And then crucially, on a valuations worksheet here, we've got logic that gets us to a free cash flow to the firm line. And then we're doing the work that I talked about. We've got a discount factor used. This is the factor that's going to take those future cash flow values and discount them into today's value. And then we've got some logic here that's figuring out what that terminal value is, that single number that captures the value of all of the future cash flow values beyond our core timeline. And if I just scoot all the way over to the end of the core timeline, you can see here that it's all captured right at the end of our core timeline in this model. And then we've got logic here that is essentially taking those future cash flow values and discounting them into today's value. And the sum of all those discounted values gets us to our enterprise value. Now, there's a lot more you could do after this if you wanted to get to equity value, if you wanted to look at potential price per share figures, but we're just going to stop there for this example. And here is a different version of a valuations model. Clearly, this is a lot simpler. This is a bit of a one-sheet wonder. This time, our inputs are formatted with blue font. And I think those are the two most common types of formatting you'll see for your inputs, which are vital to be formatted differently: yellow fill and blue font. You tend to see this more in investment banking. And here we've just got some simple assumptions, some annual assumptions. Some of these are driven actually from a historic year's set of values. We're getting some calculation logic in here for our terminal value. That gets us to our net cash flow line. And then all of the discounting is actually done through an XMPV formula. We've got some adjustments here that actually show the move that you could make to go from your enterprise value down to your equity value. So there you go, two very different types of valuations model. I don't want want to get bogged down in the detail. The point for me here is that if you think back to those 4 question words, the what are we trying to get to here is the same. We're getting to an enterprise or an equity value, but the approach we take, the how, is very, very different.
I want to get this done before the end of the call, but I just chit-chatted too much. You guys were too fun. Okay, well, thanks for coming. This is week 1 of August, Intro to Financial Modeling. Basically, I'm going to be zipping the next week or so, trying to get these done before next week. So I want to so week 1 is normally me learning the principles of whatever I'm trying to learn. This month is an Intro to Financial Modeling. Week 2 is when I apply it to a real business problem. So I'm going to attempt to put some dummy data into a financial model that I currently own and operate. And I'm going to make sure that mechanically it does what I want it to do. And I hope that I can use some of the things that I learn, which I don't hope. I know I'm going to be able to. I'm going to actually update in real time my financial model to make sense and build it with some of the structure that I learned in this coming week. Week 3 is when I'm going to send that model to my bestie Giles. He's going to roast it to oblivion, and I know he will. And we'll get to ask him some interview questions. And then week 4 is the community call. So if you would like to join Officers of the Ember, there's a link in the bio to the link and subscribe. Horrible. There's a link in the bio if you'd like to join and submit your monthly goals of what you would like to learn or achieve. And we meet in Discord and we hang out and we chit chat and we drive each other to do more. But on the 4th week, we do a Zoom call to come together, talk about, last month we talked about accountability. The month before we talked about perfectionism. So it's a good time. So if you'd like to join, links are all over the place. Hope to see you there. I'm heading over to this Discord to hang out in the chit chat chamber for a little bit, but Keshav, thank you so much for hanging out in the chat. Eric, Vishal, Matt, if you're still here, so nice seeing you all. And I will chit chat with you next week.